There are not many studios out there that need a win as badly as Marvel right now. A disastrous last 5 years of writing and storytelling culminated in a year of complete apathy and mediocrity in 2025. They drained the well of all ideas they had left so much they gave up and just decided to bring everyone back for what will likely be the ultimate consummation of the marriage between horrible slop writing and creative bankruptcy with Avengers Doomsday. The best news for Marvel is that the final cinematic lead-in to this almost certain disaster is their most popular character that they don't even have creative control over, in Spider-Man. While box office success for Spider-Man does very little for the financial side of Disney Marvel Studios, it at a bare minimum can provide some momentum to take into Avengers Doomsday, as well as give them a major win in the eyes of the general public. This video will contain spoilers, and if you care about that sort of thing, I will provide plenty of warning before that happens, but for now, let's get on to the spoiler-free portion of this video. Having seen this movie twice, the most positive thing I can say about it is, well, that I enjoyed myself while watching it. This movie reminds me a lot of movies like Deadpool and Wolverine or The Force Awakens. While you're watching them, they seem like the greatest thing ever, and you're wondering where it lines up in your most favorite movies of all time list. Yet once the credits roll, you leave the theater and let the plot, characters, and writing as a whole sit with you, the movie sort of falls apart. Maybe it's just because of how much I like Spider-Man, or even Tom Holland's version specifically, but I still had a very good time watching this movie, and if that's all you're looking for with entertainment, then I see no reason as to why you wouldn't like this movie. That being said, I do think myself initially, and others out there, have applied a double standard to judging this movie based solely on the fact that this is Spider-Man. We'll look more specifically at that in the spoiler section, but for now, a general overview. While liking this movie in general, most of the enjoyment was contained relatively to the first 2 acts. Both times I watched it, I came to the ultimate conclusion that the third act is a character assassinating, morally perplexing conclusion. Outside of the writing in this movie, when it comes to characters and plot, there's some stuff in here I definitely enjoyed. The movie is very funny, the actors bounce off each other really well and complement the humor in the script. At times, it still has that stereotypical overused Marvel humor where it's trying too hard to be Guardians of the Galaxy, but when this movie lets the humor come upon itself naturally, it works very well. Regardless of the character writing, which we will definitely go into later, Punisher strangely provides a lot of humor in this movie. I would credit most of that to Jon Bernthal's performance and the dichotomy between Frank Castle and Peter. The soundtrack for this movie is also really well done, utilizing the same basic score from the Watts Home trilogy, with minor changes, as well as including some good vocal songs and the right moments that trick viewers into experiencing an emotional payoff, of which the setup for usually does not exist within this movie. It does what a soundtrack should, which is elevate the tones the movie wants to convey instead of distracting from it. Tom Holland remains to be good as Spider-Man. His acting in this movie specifically is very good. He does an excellent job at conveying a lot of emotions non-verbally, and his face is almost aged in a way that you would assume applies to a character that's been through the stress and actions Peter has seen. The only complaint I will give towards him in general is that often in this movie he looks too short. No disrespect intended to all those short kings, it's just when you're thinking superheroes, that imposing size is so synonymous with it. He doesn't need to be as hulking as Batman, but when he's on screen with any other character, it'd be nice if he wasn't always the shortest. This wasn't really a flaw that had stuck out to me until this movie specifically. I think because he was always meant to be young, teenage kid type character, that now that he's an adult, it's very noticeable. It's a minor complaint, and it's pretty much the only thing I can nitpick about Tom Holland's portrayal of the character. For Spider-Man himself, after going back and watching Homecoming, it was notable to me how much this movie kind of fails to capture the quips that are associated with Spider-Man as a character. There's some jokes he tells while fighting for sure, but it feels like for a movie so desperate to keep the viewer laughing, the quips were few and far between, especially when you compare it to a scene like the ATM robbery in Homecoming, which is filled with humor.
Whoa, you're the Avengers! What are you guys doing here?
It feels like this version of Peter should be far more quippy than prior versions. His whole character arc stems from how alone he is, and like any smart-ass class clown, having any moment to tell your lame puns and quips, it feels like they should probably just be spilling out. Again, there's some, but it doesn't feel uniquely Spider-Man like in Homecoming. It's more like every other character in recent Marvel movies where everything has to be a one-liner. Jon Bernthal is still Jon Bernthal. He does a great job acting as Jon Bernthal, and I don't think I could think of another person to play Jon Bernthal at his level.
Let me tell you something. I tell you what. I gotta tell you something. Hey, listen, asshole. Let me tell you something. I'm gonna tell you a few things. I'll tell you what, man. I'll tell you that right now. I'll tell you what I think. I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what, man. I'm gonna tell you right now. Let me tell you something. I can also tell you. Harrison, man, let me ask you something. And I will tell you. Tell you what, girl. Let me ask you this.
Avoiding spoilers, Sadie Sink does a great job in this movie as her character. The disaster that was Stranger Things left a lot of people questioning if any of those cast members were actually able to act, and in the case of Sadie, she does a very good job. Zendaya actually very much surprised me in this movie. I personally am guilty of the accusing Zendaya of not actually ever giving any kind of performance. She basically just plays irreverent, disinterested teenager in everything I've ever seen her in. Yet in this movie, she actually gives a very strong performance as Michelle, and I think has some very high points in the movie. From a general plot standpoint, this movie is a bit of a cluttered mess. It feels like an amalgamation of Spider-Man 3, Thunderbolts, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and The Rise of Skywalker, which, listing those movies, does not exactly inspire confidence. That's because this movie carries a lot of the same problems as those movies, just at a slightly dialed down level in large part. It reminds me of Spider-Man 3 simply because of the bloat within it. This is by far the most bloated Spider-Man movie that has ever been released. I'm not sure exactly what compelled them to shove the characters they did into this movie, but it definitely weighed it down at times. I love John Bernthal's Punisher as much as the next guy, but it's very clear nobody knows what they're doing with this character. He has basically been the same level of inconsistent since Daredevil Season 2. Hulk was also an awesomely written character 10 or 15 years ago, but now he seems to be another one of these characters that they just have no clue what to do with, so they let Sony play around with him in their Spider-Man movie. Introducing these two characters specifically causes a bunch of problems in a world building or character consistency sense, but whatever, Sony can wipe their tears with the millions and millions and billions of dollars this movie generates. Despite the problems, which we'll go into later, both of these characters have a great dynamic with Peter while on the screen. Peter Parker and Bruce Banner nerding out is something that I love to see, an aspect of both of those characters that I feel like gets overlooked a lot, and putting those two characters with mutated DNA who are incredibly smart in the same room could lead to interesting outcomes. Punisher, at a certain extent, it feels like can only get so broken as a character that eventually you just have to pretend like he's a different one each time, and that's basically what I did in this movie. There's no possible way the guy in this movie is the same one from Daredevil Season 2, either season of The Punisher, Daredevil Born Again, or even the one from Punisher One Last Kill. Though he's never really developed past the character he was in Daredevil anyway, so I'm not really sure why I would have expected anything different. The issues Peter is dealing with, as shown in the trailer of the mutating DNA, is kind of interesting, but is drastically underdeveloped and monotonous in this movie, making little sense in how it's executed. It often just plays as a weird convenience to provide funny gags and never really comes around to bear consequences, yet serves as the vessel to deliver one of the supposed character arcs of Peter in this movie. The villain was a great, albeit often stupid villain for 2/3 of the movie, yet their plan and journey as the story collapses in on itself in the final act. The pacing as a whole takes a little bit of time to get going, is relatively okay once it reaches its stride, and in my personal opinion, comes crashing down in not only the third act, but two other scenes specifically earlier in the movie. From a visual standpoint, there are times where this movie looks great and makes great use of its environment. And there are times it looks like complete pig slop that was dumped onto the screen. Some of the backgrounds and action sequences look just awful, and while I like a lot of the cinematography and some of the visuals, still carries that patented modern volume CG slop look. Spider-Man's suit looks absolutely perfect. I have no notes and wish it looked like this always. This movie has just nuked the box office at well. It is the second biggest box office opening ever without adjusting for inflation, coming in only behind Avengers Endgame. If you stick around for the spoiler plot analysis, you'll see that pretty much has nothing to do with the quality of the writing, but is instead a testament to the power of Spider-Man as a character. While the conversation around superhero fatigue or Marvel fatigue or whichever theory you subscribe to has been going around, most of us have said that maybe the connected universes will dry up, but we will have Spider-Man and Batman movies ad infinitum. This movie's box office absolutely proves that. Spider-Man as a solo character is by far the biggest draw in the world of superheroes, and I would not expect that to change anytime soon. To conclude the non-spoiler section of this review, Spider-Man Brand New Day is a humorous journey with decently paced action, great acting, yet a plot that can kind of crumble if held up to any level of scrutiny. If you wish to avoid spoilers, this is your last chance to click off the video, and if you don't want me to ruin this story for you by breaking this plot down in a turbo-autistic manner, this is also your last chance to click off, because we wear the shirt for a reason. We're going to be looking into this thing as in-depth as we can. Now, this movie breaks itself in a multitude of ways, whether it just be the story itself or the already screwed up, destroyed world building that is the Marvel Cinematic Universe already. I'll try to keep those things clear when I'm talking about which one is which, but I'll try to judge this movie as a standalone Spider-Man 4, as well as including elements to that world building and character work that's already been destroyed and how this movie continues to destroy it. The key thing that I could always tell was going to be an issue with this movie from the trailers was the refusal to leave behind the characters of Ned and Michelle. John Watts' Home trilogy is by no means perfect, but I feel like is an incredible attempt at tackling the problem of trying to fit Spider-Man into this crazy MCU world. Spider-Man Homecoming serves as a great vessel to not only do some great world building with the MCU, using the consequences of past movies to create the villain and plot, but also establish Peter as a kid who's dreaming of the glamour of what it's like to be a superhero. The only major sacrifice in that movie he's required to make to be heroic is that he doesn't get to go to Homecoming with his dream girl, which to a 15-year-old boy is probably like the end of the world. Michael Keaton's Vulture remains, in my opinion, as one of the best MCU villains and is the only real friendly neighborhood story Peter ever got. 5 years ago, it felt like No Way Home had finally set this version of Peter up to be an adult and really be Spider-Man. By making the world forget who Peter Parker is, they cut his tether to the Avengers and the money of Tony Stark. When he has the resources of Stark Industries, we know what great inventions Peter can make, but what can he do as a man trying to balance his whole life with being a superhero? That's often what Spider-Man as a character is really about. You had your chance at a clean break from Ned and MJ. Peter walks into the donut shop to explain the whole scenario to her, but sees the bandage on her forehead and realizes that the only way he can truly protect the ones he loves is to let them go and live their lives without him. It's one of the most noble sacrifices I think a character has made in the MCU. Having those you care about right there and carrying all the memories you made with them, having to let them go in order to truly protect them. Maybe when it was all said and done, Peter, MJ, and Ned find themselves back to each other, but it felt like this was a chance to move on and create new friendships and relationships, perhaps trying to bring in a Harry or a Gwen, Black Cat, or Miles Morales even. Spider-Man as an IP has so many rich and interesting characters to work with, and it's really confusing to me that Sony didn't want to use them. MJ and Ned are the through line for Peter in this movie, in fact. The movie opens with him reading his letter to MJ and closes with him meeting Ned. As much as I personally didn't want those two characters in this movie, MJ herself I actually think works okay. Ned, on the other hand, is often just a screen time leech. There is no other way to describe him in this movie than utterly pointless. This non-made Spider-Man trilogy I just set up, where he does all those things I mentioned, does actually happen. It's just all within the first 6 minutes of this movie in the form of a montage. The montage accounts for what has to be 4 years of time between the ending of Spider-Man No Way Home and Ned and MJ graduating from MIT. We left Peter as a guy with no high school diploma who was studying for his GED because he didn't even exist, living in a small apartment in New York City with a crime tracking app and a sewing machine that he used to make his own suit. Within the first 6 minutes, we jump straight past that to him moving out of that apartment, getting some massive studio apartment where he has a gigantic workstation with a dozen computer screens, some kind of advanced 3D printer, and a personal AI. I have no doubt Peter is smart enough to use this stuff and create it, but we've seen what Peter without the Stark resources looks like, and that is bulky web shooters in the pajama suit of Spider-Man Homecoming. A Peter now who lives on his own and would presumably get a job of some kind, maybe get a little more advanced, nicer suit look, slightly sleeker web shooters, maybe even the moving eye lenses. But are we serious? Never once in this movie is there even a hint that this guy has any kind of job. In fact, it basically seems like he just Spider-Mans all day. This opening montage is great from a visual standpoint, creating homages to a lot of old school Spider-Man posters from the comics, yet completely undermines the prior movies. The Peter sitting, waiting for his clothes to finish washing while the news says he's the hero everybody wants to be, that's great juxtaposition, and I like it as an inverse of where we begin with Peter. In Homecoming, he wants the glamour and glory of being a full-time superhero, and now he's gotten it, he realizes the rest of the life isn't so good. The point would have been far better driven home had he been working a job to somehow afford all this stuff. Following this montage, we are introduced to Detective DeWolf. DeWolf works for the NYPD, and she, in a sense, is Peter's only tether to human connection. That would be fine if this was 6 months after No Way Home and Peter was coming to grips with what it meant to be forgotten. Unfortunately, it has not only been 4 years, but somehow Peter has a job that is well paying enough that he can afford all of this stuff he has, and I'm supposed to believe he has made no personal connections within that time span. All he does is doom scroll Instagram all day. I'm no stranger to a day of doom scrolling, don't get me wrong, but even I've made personal connections with the people I work with. DeWolf is alright in parts of this movie, but is a contributor to a large problem with this story's writing being the lack of agency Peter has over it. Essentially, every sequence in this movie follows the same basic structure. Peter goes to plot location, the plot happens, a character, or Peter's AI, explains where the plot goes next, and Peter travels to that plot location. This opening sequence is no different. Peter gets an alert on his phone about a tank driving down the city. Peter goes to stop this tank, which leads him to a damage control facility that is transferring Scorpion. After watching the body possession done by our villain, Scorpion gets away, a bomb goes off, and DeWolf tells him the rest of the information. This serves as Peter's trigger to talk to Yelena, who gives him slightly more information, which causes him to go to damage control, which leads him to a dead end. It's a massive series of and thens, which, if you're not familiar with, here's the classic Matt Parker and Trey Stone clip explaining it.
We can take these beats, which are basically the beats of your outline, and if the words and then belong between those beats, you're f***ed, basically. You got something pretty boring. What should happen between every beat that you've written down is either the word therefore or but.
Take Spider-Man Homecoming, for example. Peter spends his time after school catching criminals, and at the end of the day, he stops at a deli near his house to grab food. Therefore, he's in the area when the robbers hit the ATM using Vulture's weapons. Therefore, he learns that these weapons are on the street. But before he can get more information, his secret identity is revealed to Ned. Therefore, Ned gets himself and Peter invited to Liz's party. The only real convenience in this whole section of the movie is that he happens to spot the Shocker firing these weapons out in public. Therefore, he goes to chase them down and manages to pull the energy core out, but Vulture grabs him before he can follow them. Therefore, he tracks down the core to study it, but a pulse from it leads Shockers to Peter's school. Therefore, he can stick a tracker to him, leading him to DC. You can go on and on. Technically, you can make a weak argument that Peter knows something is happening with the possession, therefore he goes to Yelena, but the conveniences and contrivances that make that even an option is already several layers past the one lucky coincidence of Homecoming. Thank goodness Yelena has told him where to meet before. It's a good thing Peter can recognize this possession thing happening. There's already so many, individual little contrivances that just are not there in a movie like Spider-Man Homecoming that has a much tighter script. The real problem this creates is removing all of the agency from the story for Peter. This is no longer Peter's story. It's a series of events that Peter tracks because everyone tells him where the next plot beat goes. Speaking of which, the two Yelena scenes in this movie are absolutely awful. I get that for some reason, there's a very passionate contingent of Yelena superfans out there, but this has to be one of the most pointless characters ever to exist in this universe. She is a derivative of Natasha Romanoff, who has a lot of great character writing, and most of all, did not talk in an abysmal excuse for a Russian accent the entire time. Along with the minor but very vocal contingent of Yelena fans was an equally minor and vocal contingent of Thunderbolts fans. The movie was the lowest grossing Marvel movie all of last year, and despite being hailed as some deep mental health movie, is so incredibly shallow and meaningless, which makes it the perfect summary of Yelena's character. Yelena's character in Thunderbolts was that she was sad because she was sad. You could try and argue it's because of Natasha, but Black Widow takes place in 2016, Yelena gets blipped in 2018, comes back in 2023, and Thunderbolts is in 2027. She wasn't really with Natasha in those 2 years, so I'm not buying that. It's all because she never had a family or something like that, which, to an extent, in those 4 years prior, was her complete own fault. But whatever, the point is, Natasha has more character work in one line than Yelena has ever had through an entire character.
I got red in my ledger. I'd like to wipe it out.
Peter tells Yelena about this mind controller possession, to which Yelena tells him the new Avengers don't deal with small potatoes. If a mind controlling or demon possessing psychic attacking damage control facilities which, mind you, contain untold weapons and alien technology, looking for something called VMAX and is willing to kill anyone who gets in its way, is not an Avengers level threat, I'm not really sure what quantifies one of those. Especially when the Avengers these days are just 3 Captain America ripoffs who shoot guns, a Black Widow ripoff who shoots guns, and a chick who can phase but only when it doesn't inconvenience plot. This scene is completely purposeless and a waste of time. It serves to give Peter the name VMAX, which is just a complete red herring anyway, and sends him to go to more damage control facilities. She also tells Peter this person isn't mind controlling, she's possessing. How does she know this? Well, the answer is because the script says so. She has literally no way of knowing this for a fact. It's kind of just a guess, but the script says it's right, so it's right. I'm sure there are some jokes in this scene that are hilarious to some people, but to me this felt like it dragged on so much, and I was desperately just hoping the scene would end. I personally don't want rip-off Black Widows telling Spider-Man his story is irrelevant and lame, small potatoes or whatever. Following that complete waste of screen time, Peter travels to the damage control headquarters. There he speaks with Director Metziger. He gains nothing from the sequence except that maybe whatever VMAX is behind a giant vault. This sequence does, however, reintroduce something I have been waiting to see another attempt at since The Defenders, which is the hand. This movie does something incredible with the hand, which is, it made me miss the flat-out appalling version from Defenders. They are nothing but a key jangle, so that later in this movie Peter can fight some ninjas. The Hand is a really cool set of villains. I like how they were handled in Daredevil Season 1 and 2, but there's just not been a good version of them since, and maybe this is the sign to quit trying. After this sequence, Peter goes to the bodega he usually goes in order to get flowers for Aunt May's grave. I do quite like that they gave Peter this consistent routine of taking flowers to Aunt May's grave. If we go with this seemingly impossible establishment that he has just made no connections in the last 4 years, May serving as his anchor to the real world and a reminder as why he does what he does is great. It could hypothetically also serve as a great reminder as to why he should keep MJ and Ned protected. This movie doesn't do that, but it would have been a great idea. During this sequence, Ned walks into the same bodega. To be as good faith and fair as possible to this movie, Ned and MJ just moved back to New York. Peter lives in an area that would seemingly have to offer cheaper rent, so 2 freshly graduated college kids may also live in the same area. The more reasonable take on this scene is that it's just absurdly lucky that Ned happens to walk in this exact same bodega at the exact same time as Peter, because he has to ride the subway back to his apartment, so it's not like it's in the area per se. And it's worth noting that it cannot be overshadowed how important this coincidence is. This is the genesis for a massively important plot point in the entire movie. Peter follows Ned back to his apartment, where he speaks with MJ, and he sees MJ kiss her boyfriend, who isn't technically named, but let's be honest, we all know his name is definitely Paul. This is apparently a massively high stress trigger for Peter, which causes his arachnid hormones to overpower his regular hormones. Since he has been Spider-Man, this is a character who has watched his friends nearly die in the Washington Monument, found out his homecoming date's dad was the Vulture, had a building dropped on his head, went to space where he fought Thanos and lost, came back from the dead, watched his main mentor and father figure die, accidentally handed a weapon of mass destruction to a supervillain, had his secret identity revealed, watched the woman who raised him and the most influential adult in his life, Aunt May, die, for which he blames himself, by the way, and was erased from the memory of everyone he's ever known. But specifically seeing his ex-girlfriend, who mind you he dated for like a year and a half at most, who he made peace with the fact that 4 years ago he wouldn't tell who he was, kiss some guy at a party, is a high stress event that triggers this mutation in hormones. Yeah, that does not make a lot of sense. Following this sequence, again we have a problem with the agency of this story. Peter doesn't have to figure out this issue on his own. This AI that somehow just tells him what the plot is, tells him about the mutation. Peter goes to fight Scorpion but loses control and the mutation causes him to nearly kill a cop. Just cut out the AI telling him about his mutation and have this be the moment Peter realizes that something's wrong. Then he can figure out what to do for himself. But because he has the AI tell him everything, Peter goes to ESU where he talks with Bruce Banner. Bruce and Peter discuss the inhibitor Bruce created to suppress his radioactive DNA, and Peter wants to know if he can target just some of the mutations. Bruce tells him it would be insanely difficult and potentially dangerous if that was done in the wrong hands. This scene is for the purpose of Bruce introducing this idea that perhaps you shouldn't fight the nature of this mutation. Perhaps it's best to leave what's natural as it is, because who are we to decide what makes nature good or bad? This is something that gets mentioned a few times and is supposed to be involved in a character arc, but strangely, Peter never actually does anything to learn this lesson. Eventually just kind of accepts that it's the case. I really don't dislike much of this conversation, but it sets up a problem that just does not exist, which is this claim that making an inhibitor is difficult, which is just not true. Peter very easily makes the inhibitor that works to suppress his DNA. What doesn't work is completely unrelated to the issue of mutation. So that whole extremely difficult thing Bruce was talking about was just wrong, thus rendering that scene as entirely pointless other than to set up that Hulk works at ESU. Following his test of the inhibitor, he has another run-in with our Mind Possessor. The Mind Possessor reveals herself to be in Peter's apartment, and she's found the letter he wrote to MJ. So how does she know where Peter lived? Was that what was conveyed to her when she tried to possess his mind earlier in the movie? All we saw was one scene with Aunt May, and using that, she managed to successfully figure out where Peter lived? Or as it seems to work with other people, when she possesses them, she gathers all their memories? Did she just take over enough people that she found out where he lives? Either way, she had to do all of that and hope Peter wasn't in his apartment, otherwise her whole plan would have collapsed because she can't take him over. So you might be asking yourself, what is her plan? Well, for now, as a Chekhov's gun, if you will, all I will say is it is arbitrary, meandering, flat out stupid, and it's mixed with a flash of unnecessarily cruel and evil behavior. But that requires its own section, which we will get towards the end of the video. Our villain, while explaining to Peter, makes an innocent guy walk out into traffic where he gets run over by a taxi. As they hop between bodies, racing to Ned and MJ's place, what makes no sense to me is that presumably Peter would not have gone far from his apartment to test his inhibitor. so why not just go back to his apartment and stop the possessor there? If that's too far, why in the hell did he go so far away? What if he loses control and nearly kills someone again? There is no way to defend this sequence from Peter's point of view. He either made one bad decision or a different bad decision. This only exists to set up the limit of our possessor's jump length. Peter's trusty AI that solves all his problems for him tells him it jumps 33 feet maximum, so he webs the helicopter whose pilot she's possessing to a crane. I cannot stress enough, this sequence only works if Peter just chose to go miles away to test his inhibitor, because he gets beat to Ned and MJ's apartment, meaning he had to start moving back towards Ned and MJ's apartment and somehow be further from there than the possessor is coming from his apartment. So this sequence only works if Peter makes at least one absurdly out of character and insane decision. Following the webbing up of the helicopter, Peter races back to Ned and MJ's apartment to get MJ to safety. Peter is notably very unconcerned with where Ned might be. He asks MJ where he is, and she says he's in Boston with some friends, and that is the end of the conversation. It's not like this possessor can't just get to Boston. Peter getting MJ to safety first, that makes plenty of sense. But it's more the lack of concern after the fact that's just insane to me. Peter takes MJ to a roof, and she questions him, and she begins to connect the dots that her and Spider-Man used to know each other. She then kisses Peter, who kisses her back, which seemingly breaks the memory forgetting spell as MJ is reintroduced with all her memories, except, wait, it was a trick as our possessor reveals she was in control of Michelle the whole time. I'm not gonna lie, when I watched this the first time, I had to admit, they got me. I was so expecting this movie to take the easy way out of this memory spell and have it be that true love's kiss makes her remember or some lazy BS similar to that this twist completely blindsided me. I thought Zendaya acted this scene out really well, going from the emotional realization to the cold, heated face. This scene is particularly good at establishing just how evil this villain is as well. Toying with Peter like this, mixed with all the murder, it's so great to have a completely unredeemable villain. Mix that with this movie not taking the easy way out of the memory spell, I really like this scene. Surely the third act of this movie won't completely undermine both of those points of praise I'm giving it. And you know what? I'm nice. I'll even run a little bit of defense for some criticism that's probably out there. Inexplicably, Peter had to have been testing his inhibitor far away from home, which allowed our villain to hop out of the helicopter pilot, make her way to MJ, and since MJ has no actual memories of Peter, she's only able to use the times MJ remembers Spider-Man to trick Peter into thinking she's figured it out. It's certainly not airtight writing, but I think it's sufficient enough to cover its bases. If you ignore the story reasoning behind this scene and the fact that it has an emotional payoff to movies not connected to this one, in a complete isolation, it's a solid, dare I even say potentially good scene. Following this scene, Peter's arachnid hormones act up and he threatens our villain through MJ. Our villain uses this opportunity to fling MJ off the roof. Peter then dives after MJ as she wakes up, and MJ stays asleep just long enough for Peter to have a conversation with our main villain, who threatens to hurt MJ if he keeps getting in the way before she drives away. Technically not impossible, but rather lazy and convenient in my personal opinion. Our villain also looks directly at Peter, so there goes all that big secretism crap she was going for before, I suppose. Peter takes MJ to Frank's house, harbor. He lives in a boat that's in a boat garage. Peter trips over some tripwires, triggering various traps, and Frank just kind of lets this happen. We get some funny laughs out of Frank and Peter talking, and MJ asks who Frank is. The timeline is a disaster as it is, but it's Marvel's fault, so they're the ones who have to deal with the consequences. Frank very publicly and violently murdered criminals in the fall of 2015. That would chronologically put it about when Peter first got his spider powers and a year before Homecoming. But either way, he and MJ were freshmen in high school, and Frank's trial was all over the news. You still would maybe have some plausible deniability, but not when you remember that MJ was extremely politically opinionated in Homecoming. So the fact that she would not know anything about Frank Castle is completely absurd. I don't want those Netflix shows to be canon in the MCU, but hey, when you say that they are, you have to deal with the consequences. Peter then sits down with MJ and plugs a USB into the computer, saying he pulled the image from his HUD and ran it through the system. I don't know what the hell to interpret from any of this. Did he have this USB stick plugged into his suit? Is the USB stick the system? because he just sort of plugs it in and all the information available comes up, including our villain's name, Jean Grey. Presumably he scanned her face and the AI did all the work determining it. So what the hell was the USB stick? And the line, "I pulled the image from the HUD and ran it through the system," is one of the laziest garbage pieces of exposition dialogue I've ever heard. This sequence is also hilarious because it's one of 2 separate times in this movie where a character says most of Jean's information has been scrubbed, then proceeds to say the only information that's even relevant is what they found. "Sir, we finished scrubbing most of those Jean Grey files." "Oh good, hopefully not all of them, right?" "No, everything except her name, where she's been the last few years, and the fact that she has telepathy." "Good job, Private." I mean, come on, really, please. Tell me, what purpose does this lazy scene serve other than to have a moment where the name Jean Grey pops up screen, and then there's a moment of quiet for the audience to cheer? This horrible, lazy exposition done in the form of running her face through the system, which took no effort at all, and no actual information is gained from this. What good does having her name even do Peter? Frank then tells Peter to kill Jean Grey while eating chili out of a can. Anybody who gets to write anything with Punisher, you are not the incredible brains behind Netflix's Daredevil. Stop trying to recreate the rooftop scene. I agree, it's great, but every time Frank interacts with the hero, he doesn't need to be sitting ominously, eating out of a can, pointing out that they don't have the guts to do what needs to be done. When he's not joking around in this movie, that's basically all his scenes. I guess at least he's not crying and screaming every other scene or trying to kill the last people responsible for his family's death, so improvement? I don't know. Thankfully for Peter, Frank has the stuff he needs to complete his inhibitor, because bombs or whatever. Peter talks with MJ, and MJ solves his problem, something magnetic field, and boom, the inhibitor's all good now, just like that. A supposedly extremely difficult thing to accomplish, according to Bruce Banner, requires 5 prototypes and 2 minor scenes in the movie. Again, we get someone then telling Peter suppressing his nature is bad, but then he has to run off to stop Jean, who's at the main damage control facility. Before that, however, we have our real attempt at trying to do some Daredevil Season 2. Frank pokes at Peter, trying to figure out who MJ is to him. Peter pushes back, saying he's like Frank, and Frank criticizes him, saying if he could have another chance with his family, the last thing he would do would be hide behind a mask. The movie seems to think Frank is correct, and presumably Peter does too, but he's just wrong. Now, in defense of Frank, he doesn't have all the context, but that is not some poignant moment. Him calling Peter a coward makes sense given all the information Frank has, but where's the pushback from Peter? Why does Peter not give Frank the same hypothetical he had? Does Peter or even the writer seriously not think that if Frank had the choice, that his family could live and be safe at the cost of them forgetting Frank ever existed? You don't think he would take that? I absolutely do. But we aren't given that because this story desperately wants us to think the decision for Peter not to open himself back to MJ and Ned is not only wrong, but also not a noble sacrifice, which I believe can only be interpreted as a noble sacrifice accurately. But once Peter leaves, MJ tells Frank to go help Peter. Peter walks in the damage control building where Jean is currently, and he sees her. That's great, let's just web her up, slap the inhibitor on her, and boom, problem solved. Obviously that doesn't happen, she just kind of slowly walks toward Peter and shows she's removed Hulk's inhibitor and Smart Hulk is here. Peter forces Hulk to hit his head, which caused him to nearly push Jean out, but Frank shows up with some flashbangs and shoots the Hulk. Somehow he drove his battle van here, made it all the way up here to this part of the building in barely less time than it took Peter to swing here. We get the great Flanderized Punisher yelling as he shoots at Hulk, because hey, remember Punisher yells and growls when he's shooting guns and killing people, so that's awesome, we got the character thing. Peter tells Frank it's above his pay grade and they're fighting the Hulk. Frank then gets all surprised and yells, "Oh shit." So he somehow dumped an entire LMG into the giant green monster and didn't realize it was the Hulk? Or was he saying that because Hulk is breaking out of the webs? Or was it because the writers think it's funny? My best guess with the sequence is that it's him reacting to Hulk stomping on the ground, yet they edited it wrong and they made it him reacting to Hulk breaking out of the webs, because it's very clunky if you try to figure out why he's reacting like that. Following that sequence, we get some important setup because he finds some super bombs on the ground and he throws one at Hulk and then shoots it to blow it up instantly. He then argues with Peter, and basically Punisher says he should go after Jean and Peter will go after Hulk. Now, I'm not really sure what Peter's plan is for Punisher to take care of her without not only killing her, but also not getting within 33 feet of her in a tightly enclosed office space. But this movie doesn't really care enough to explain it, so what's even the point in trying to guess? Also, if Peter is so concerned she's a problem, why not just go web her up? He can get as close as he needs. Why has he not a single time shot a web at her? He had so long to do it before his fight with Hulk began, and sometime after. It was the first thing he did when he had Vulture alone in Spider-Man Homecoming. It was the first thing he did when he thought that Green Goblin was going evil in Spider-Man No Way Home. It's something he would do because it's smart to do. Why has he not done it yet? Bruce transformed into Savage Hulk, and Peter says he didn't know he could get that big. The kid, who grew up in New York City, didn't know the Hulk could get that big. Are we joking? Did we even try to maintain the simplest form of world building? No? Okay. Punisher immediately gets mind controlled by Jean because obviously, and we get this great joke making fun of how traumatic Frank's life is.
This guy's got issues.
This is hilarious. And it works because Jean's a complete psychopath. So surely, there won't be a moment later in this movie where somehow someone's tragic memory makes her care about stuff. He grabs the bombs he used as Hulk and places them around the vault. He then sets a timer for 2 minutes. Why does he set a timer and not just immediately blow them up, you might ask? And the answer to that is because this movie needs Peter to arrive in the vault shortly after Jean, and they couldn't think of a smarter reason, so this is what they came up with. Peter fights Hulk, and eventually Hulk just sort of stops after seeing his reflection, and goofily kind of falls out of the building. Jean walks into the vault and threatens Metzger, asking him where she is, before Spider-Man slaps the inhibitor on her, before Metzger shoots her with a dart and she gets captured. Don't worry, none of this makes any sense, but Jean is getting her own section later, where this scene will get picked apart even more. Jean says Sarah before going unconscious, and when Peter questions Metzger about this, he says she got into his head and Sarah was a co-worker who recently passed. Skipping ahead, it's later revealed that this is obviously a lie. Yes, he is lying here because the script says so, but I'm like 90% certain this lie also just works. When Jean jumps into people's minds, she seemingly gets all of their memories. Metzger never once says he remembers what was happening when he jumped into her mind, only that she did. Peter's ultimate conclusion about Metzger lying is because nobody is supposed to remember being controlled, but why would that mean anything here? Look at it from all the information Peter has. Metzger knows Jean can jump into people's minds. Peter knows when jumping into people's minds, Jean gets all their memories. Peter asks Metzger if the name Sarah means anything to him. Metzger says she jumped into his mind for a moment and the memory of Sarah must have affected her. The funniest part about this lie is it's also technically just true. As later revealed, Metzger was working with Sarah and she did recently pass, and her passing must have affected Jean pretty harshly. So he's leaving out some important information, but he's still technically not even lying. This argument's not airtight. I'd accept some pushback into you trying to convince me that he needs to add a word here or there to make this lie technically work, or if it already works or whatever. I'm just saying the point is, I don't think Peter has nearly enough information to later jump to the conclusion that he's lying, and as we'll get into, ultimately, he should have already figured this out if just knowing MJ doesn't remember anything is enough to conclude Metzger's lying. Peter returns to Frank's boat and MJ has read his letter. This scene is almost okay, but MJ is not near enough freaked out at all. In fact, she doesn't even really panic. Think about the information she just learned. Everything she has lived over the past few years is a complete lie. There is a life that she lived where she loved somebody and had planned a future after high school with, seemingly, and that part of her is gone. She has no memory of it. Her past life has been killed, and she has been moving forward with a life that is by all means missing something that made her part of who she was. Not to mention, it's not like Peter explains the universe was going to end if he didn't make everyone forget. So to her, it just seems like some selfish choice he made against her will. And Peter has no backbone yet again and doesn't defend himself. But then we get, it's a funny moment because she asks him to take her home, and then he gets there and she invites him up to come hang out with her and her best friend, who also had his memory wiped according to this. So if MJ really cared about Peter making this decision for her, shouldn't she just tell Ned or push Peter to tell Ned? But whatever, dude, I guess. We get a Lord of the Rings reference here, but come on, writers. You can't just use a masterpiece to try to detract me from how absurd the writing is in this whole scene. Yet, we alas are now past the point where my enjoyment of this movie carried me through how brittle the script was. We have reached the end of the second act and the beginning of the third. And if you thought this video was already sounding rough and critical, this is the part of the movie I don't like, so buckle up. Peter admits to MJ that Jean made him sexually assault or harass or whatever you would call kissing her body without her knowledge, so hey, congrats Peter, you did the one thing even Wonder Woman couldn't. admit it was wrong to do that. The only difference being Wonder Woman has fully aware that the guy's body wasn't Steve, whereas at least Peter was tricked. MJ tells Peter she has no memory of Jean taking over her body, which is how Peter learns Metzger lied to him. As I explained, Peter does not have enough information to actually assume this, and even if he did, pretty much everyone who has been controlled has mentioned they don't remember anything. So, he would have already figured it out. Peter thankfully knows where they're keeping Jean, but hey, we need to waste everybody's time so we get another Yelena scene. This scene is somehow even more stupid than the previous one, because Yelena, again like Peter earlier, says most of Jean's data has been scrubbed, except the one piece of data you need, which is that Sarah is Jean's sister, and they ran spooky evil tests on her. First, it's time for a flashback. Jean remembers the day Sarah was taken. It's this super wholesome scene where her and her sister are just mind raping people by taking over their bodies. This is pretty nightmarish, and it's absurd that this movie thinks this scene is some wholesome thing where they're wronged by damage control. But this I will also save for the Jean Grey section. Metzger explains that they're going to run experiments on her and that her sister sacrificed herself to accomplish the creation of this room. Somehow Jean still doesn't realize her sister is dead, but maybe that's just because she's in denial or whatever, because he literally basically said, hey, your sister's dead. Peter begins to fight his way into damage control as Jean looks up and she sees VMAX on the vent, and she realizes her sister died in that room. While all this is happening and Peter's fighting with those damage control guards, Frank is chasing after him, and he tells him if he lets Jean out, he'll handle it his way. As the realization of Sarah's fate hits Jean, she gains super bonus powers and destroys the testing facility and freezing everybody within a kilometer of the island. She drags Metzger toward her and uses the glass to hold him hostage, as well as destroying the inhibitor, ensuring she cannot be stopped. Peter continues to walk through the facility where he's greeted by the Hand, now under the control of Jean Grey. After Punisher exposits the situation to Peter that Jean has frozen everyone within a kilometer of the island, Frank begins to drive for a tall skyscraper. Jean uses the Hand to fight Peter, and at one point during the fight, a couple of members of Damage Control walk out with sonic weapons. Spidey shoots webs at these guys, but their weapons destroy his webs. Jean tries to use this to show Peter Damage Control is the real enemy. To be honest, it simply just makes sense that Damage Control would create devices to contain Spider-Man. It's the same reason Batman has contingency plans for the Justice League, or S.H.I.E.L.D. was using the Tesseract to make weapons. Maybe one day a crazy telepath, well, I don't know, take over Spider-Man's mind and begin attacking cities. That's a crazy idea. I don't know why I would think that. Obviously, the department in charge of monitoring superhumans would have these weapons. Why does Jean not kill Metzger here? I don't know. The argument the scriptwriters would try and make is probably that she's not actually a bad person. The problem there is that she very much is a bad person. She has killed or greatly maimed everyone in her way to get here, and now the one guy she actually was wronged by is at her mercy, and she just doesn't kill him. As Peter is fighting, his web shooters are broken, and he's beaten. He falls to his knees and takes his mask off. Now Jean has Spider-Man at his mercy, and what does she do?
He starts monologuing.
This is the big, final part of this so-called character arc Peter has been on. The arc of embracing your change, not hiding from or suppressing your nature. Jean Grey asks him if he's Peter Parker or Spider-Man, and as she does this, Peter slowly removes his inhibitor. At this moment, Jean has her hand mind-controlled goon jump off the wall, and just before he stabs Peter in the brain, Peter gives his organic webbing the activation thing and stops the sword in its tracks. Peter says, "I'm both," and then launches this member of the Hand towards a giant spike, and for a moment the movie acts like that's gonna kill him, but Peter catches him with the webbing. The implication here being if he was just Spider-Man, he'd let this guy die? Or what else am I missing? Because it's not like Spider-Man was just killing people, but the whole point of this scene was Peter's both, so he's gonna do stuff that Spider-Man would do, but also Peter Parker. I don't know why the movie placed such emphasis on that spike, or like this guy was gonna die, but it doesn't make much sense. Peter now has popped his suit power, and he uses his ultimate ability to fight the Hand. He has now expertly mastered his heightened senses and organic webbing, despite no understanding or training and actively trying to fight it the whole time, as he fights the final fight without his mask on, because it wouldn't be a superhero movie if the superhero didn't take his key part of the costume off before the final fight. I know it's a character theme choice, but I think the character arc was stupid and that it doesn't work. This character arc mirrors a certain character very specifically, that of course being Rey Skywalker, everyone's favorite. That's right, Spider-Man is a Mary Sue in this movie. He learns that the power he needed was inside him all along, and he doesn't have to do anything to earn it. Nothing pushes him to actually come to this conclusion on its own. The only time we actually see him let his mutation take control, it's only ended badly in this movie. If you want a character to accept change like this, it needs to be out of choice, not force. You know what happens if Peter doesn't use his organic webbing at this sequence in the movie? He dies, and Jean kills everyone within a kilometer of the island because he was about to get stabbed in the head by a sword. This scene doesn't lend itself to the lesson of embracing your nature, because if Peter doesn't, he just loses. There is no consequence other than he dies. Obviously, he makes the choice to accept his organic webbing and nature, because if he doesn't, then he just loses. That's not enforcing a character arc, that's just bad writing. Choosing one does not compromise who he is, it just kills him. And that's it, that's the final boss fight of the movie. We'll now proceed to do the Thunderbolts thing where he beats the villain via group hug. Peter immediately walks in and tells Jean to release Metzger because she's not a killer. You know what? Peter's actually right, as long as you just ignore all of the innocent people she's killed to get to this point. Or the fact that she would have just killed Peter if he didn't do the whole Mary Sue character arc. As Punisher lines up a shot with a Barrett 50 cal, Peter lets Jean inside his head. Here she sees this memory Peter has of Aunt May. The memory is all about Aunt May telling Peter that because he has powers and is special, people try to hurt him, but there are people who still love him just as he is, no matter what.
Profound, but technically meaningless.
The trick here is that Peter managed to let Jean into his head to swap places with him. Unfortunately, Peter makes one fatal mistake. We've already seen when she took control of Punisher's mind, who has an extremely tragic backstory, mind you, it has no effect on this crazy psychopath. When Jean gains the memories of Frank, who mind you had been to war, watched his family get executed in front of him as collateral damage to a government sting, and get shot in the head, which she could kind of probably relate to the government killing a family member of Frank because, hey, Sarah, right? But no, she just wants to make a joke about it. The other issue is this message should have no effect on Jean, because when it's all said and done, Jean literally has nobody who actually cares about her. Her sister's dead, her mother abandoned her. It's great that Aunt May loves Peter, but why should Jean give a damn? It's great that Peter says, hey, I'm here for you, but what does Jean have to believe this? Aunt May literally is just telling Peter, Peter, I'm your aunt and I love you. And that makes Jean Grey not kill people. Look, it's a thoughtful memory for Peter, but let's be real here. There's something that way more specifically applies to Jean that she needs to hear right now.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Logic, reasoning, and consistency aside though, this somehow works, and because Aunt May loved Peter, Jean Grey is now gonna stop murdering the shit out of people because Peter says she's not alone and she has him. With a better written, non-psychotic, crazy monster character version of Jean Grey, this could make for an interesting idea. In a way, Jean knows more about Peter than anyone else out there. She may actually have some grasp of the sacrifice he made at the end of No Way Home. The problem is, this character is evil as hell. Let's take a pause at this point in the story and actually try to figure out what this amalgamation of heinous activities that creates the character of Jean Grey is actually supposed to be in this movie. What is Jean's plan exactly? She wants to find her sister, and she believes that finding out what VMAX is will give her the answer she needs. The main person she knows that can give her this information is Metzger, or at least maybe off the servers at damage control facilities. Her power gives her the ability to take over people's mind and inhabit their brains with her own actions, as well as giving her all of the information in their life so that she could flawlessly be undercover as them. The people she takes over carry no memory of how they got where they were or what actions they did. In the scene the movie thinks is so wholesome, some great moment between Jean and her sister Sarah, we get to see just how self-centered these two crazy psychos are. These two sisters are just having a good time in the park, and they decide that they have the right to just take over these innocent people's mind as an example of what they can do. Do they make them do anything illegal or wrong? No. Is this still insanely messed up? Yes. Think exactly about what they're doing. They're taking over these innocent people's brains and forcing them to do actions against their will and without their knowledge. You get the idea here? They're mind raping them. Thankfully, mind rape has actually happened in this universe before, so we get a first-hand account from a character at just how horrifying it is.
Have you ever had someone take your brain and play? Pull you out. Stuff something else in. You know what it's like to be unmade.
What this movie's writers believe they're doing with this scene is showing these two sisters who've been abandoned by their mother being wrongfully attacked by the bullies at Damage Control because they're different and special. What's actually done as this scene is quite the contrary. These horrible mind rapists are taking over the bodies of people minding their own business in a park, and those heroes at Damage Control show up to get their dangerous super-powered psychos off the streets. Is the evil torture testering a bridge too far? Obviously. Damage Control isn't perfect here either, but I can at least say why they felt the need to take Sarah and Jean into custody makes perfect sense. So, if Jean's plan is to learn what VMAX is, why not just mind rape a guy who works in a Damage Control office and type VMAX into a computer? Why not just mind rape someone who works in Metzger's office and then jump into him? When she mind rapes, she gains all their memories seemingly, so why not do that? No, instead she goes to a facility where she jumps in the mind of a janitor, slaps a bomb in a tank, and has a janitor drive down the streets of New York City, killing untold number of civilians, intending to blow up a building, killing the lady driving and anyone who doesn't make it out of the building in time, all so that she can have them take Scorpion to a different location so she can break him out, so she can make him break into a separate facility where she can look up VMAX, and after not learning anything, she decides to get the Hulk and go herself into the most secure building Damage Control owns, where she can get inside a vault to question Metzger about where her sister is. While doing this, she decides it's a good idea to taunt and provoke Spider-Man for no particular reason, when he's literally the only person capable of getting within 33 feet of her. What the hell is this plan? But you know what? I gotta be as good faith to this movie as possible. So the only positive interpretation of this is it's just an excuse to kill so many innocent people to accomplish something you could have done with no casualties in complete secrecy. She kills untold amounts in the tank drive. If the building she's attacking didn't have the power of movie magic, which allows people to evacuate in time, that would have killed so many innocent people. She throws a guy off a roof so that Spider-Man saves him. That would have killed him if Spider-Man didn't save him. She walks an innocent sanitation worker into oncoming traffic, likely killing him, if not paralyzing him for life. She tricks Peter into sexually assaulting MJ and then throws MJ off the roof, which would have killed her if Peter couldn't save her. She then takes the Hulk into a building, which could kill untold amounts of people, and then at the end of the movie, for some reason, doesn't just execute the one guy who actually wronged her. What an evil psychopath. And what's the excuse that they can even make to redeem her? Is it that her sister died? Well, to anyone who thinks that's a good argument, I'll just throw the good old Daredevil in here for a rebuttal.
You know you're not the only one, right? Who did you lose? Huh? Was it someone you loved? Well, boo-hoo. Let me tell you something, buddy. Everybody's lost someone. Doesn't mean you have to do this.
At least when Daredevil was saying that, by the way, Punisher was only shooting criminals. Jean pretty much only killed innocent people in the entire span of this movie. And she's even dumber, because say she wants to do this crazy psycho plan, when she has Metzger on his hands and knees in the vault, why threaten to kill him? He has all the information you need. Just mind rape him and you'll learn Sarah's dead. Why would she ever go in person there anyway? The only way Jean loses is if someone can stop her powers, or that the person whose mind she's currently raping is permanently kept 33 feet away from all people for the rest of time. She should be locked away in a bunker somewhere, making sure nobody can get to her. And the last thing she should ever do is instigate an attack from the one guy who can actually get close enough to stop her. All this to say, Jean Grey is a stupid, psychotic, dangerous threat who lusts for the blood of innocent people in lieu of a plan where she could have done something that would have not been seen, never been caught, or stopped. Jean has committed all these crimes and needs to be held accountable for them. Just because Daredevil understands why Frank does what he does, doesn't mean he lets Frank run away from the cops. No, he sends him to jail. Punisher, though, shoots Jean, but Peter, who has plenty of time to push Jean away, instead hugs her and twists himself in front of the bullet. Now, I'd be remiss to not tap into some gun autism here and point out that this bullet, if it's able to puncture Peter's back, is definitely going straight through him and through Jean as well. And if it doesn't somehow exit out Peter, it's just going to bounce around inside him and turn his internal organs into a cherry slushy. Point being, Peter should be very dead. Also, if this movie wants to say a bullet can go through Peter's back, then I really have a hard time believing a 40mm grenade that isn't exploded could get launched directly out of a grenade launcher through his chest and not kill him. But whatever. Instead, he's just going to start bleeding out, and Jean will use some voodoo magic force healing bullshit to keep him alive. Unfortunately, in the meta, however, this is where the character of Spider-Man in the MCU is brutally assassinated. As Jean stands over him, Peter tells her she needs to run because they'll be looking for her. Remember all those crimes she just did? Yeah, Peter doesn't want her to face the punishment or be held accountable. He wants her to run from the cops. The thing about Spider-Man that should make him very hard to assassinate this thoroughly is entire purpose behind his life is summed up in one phrase.
And with great power
there must also come great responsibility.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
That statement to Jean Grey is the opposite. She has great power and has used it in possibly the most irresponsible way one could. Would Peter, or Frank for that matter, want Jean to be tortured by damage control? No, of course not. When Peter miraculously wakes up in the hospital the next day, they should not be gleefully celebrating that Jean has escaped and made it away. They should be preparing to go hunt her down. She's absurdly dangerous. What if she gets a dog that eventually dies and she decides that San Francisco has to get wiped off the map because of it? That's on Peter. She needs to face punishment for absurdly evil behavior. If you want to have the great power, the great responsibility comes with it. That's what Peter should believe, so this is just straight character assassination. And speaking of that hospital, it's got some hilarious problems too. I get they've just decided this Punisher is completely different from any other Punisher, but the problem is, he's not. This is the same guy who was charged and convicted of 30 murders. Just because he escaped prison doesn't mean he gets pardoned. So he should 1,000,000% be getting arrested. On top of that, what makes this even funnier is this hospital is the exact same one he shot up in Daredevil Season 2. As Peter, though, miraculously, the next day recovers from a 50 cal bullet to the back, he then walks out of the hospital. And Frank puts on the Spider-Man mask and begins cheering to the crowd. Funny? I'm sure it is once or twice. In character for the guy in this movie or any other version of the Punisher? Of course not. Peter goes to visit Aunt May's grave one last time and tells her he's not going to do this alone anymore. What does that mean? I have no idea. This theme of not being alone and needing people to help you is just non-existent in the rest of the movie. The only times Peter actually had help, it only hurt him. NJ helped him with the inhibitor, which only nerfed him because he just always had the power inside him or whatever. Punisher got himself mind raped and blew down a vault door, then shot Peter, nearly killing him. And Jean is an evil psycho. If Peter had nobody and did everything alone, he would have just won easier. After a nice look at the sunset over New York City that would have been a decent ending shot, they instead decided to take Spider-Man No Way Home out back and shoot it in the head. The one thing I was glad this movie hadn't done still, despite all the issues with everything, at the bare minimum, they didn't take the lame, easy way out of the memory forgetting spell. But now with the final sequence of this movie, Peter walks up and does his handshake with Ned, and suddenly Ned remembers Peter. MJ, she wasn't aware when Peter kissed her before, and based off this scene, there's no reason to assume that a true love's kiss cheesy bullshit won't just wipe away the effect of Doctor Strange's spell. So everything from Peter's past character growth, the themes and stories as a whole from the John Watts Home trilogy has now just been completely undermined, and the final sacrifice, being shit on all movie, has officially been destroyed. At times, I'll admit it, this movie's very funny, but this script was straight cancer. And after the filmmakers learned the script had cancer, they came in with a syringe filled with AIDS and injected that in there. The MCU has so few characters intact for what they should be, and now one of the better ones can be scratched off that list. Peter has been completely assassinated now in the MCU, and none of it matters. This film is a box office success in the truest sense of the word, a monster performer, already surpassed $1 billion, and now the question is, will it hit 2? This script is purely awful, the epitome of the state of where writing is these days. And yet, in spite of that, Spider-Man as a character is the single biggest box office IP out there. Star Wars is dead, Superman and Batman haven't hit $1 billion in years, and all that leaves is now Spider-Man as the biggest cinematic IP that exists. The biggest annoyance this movie gives me is just the opportunity cost that it took. I really like Tom Holland as Spider-Man. And there are clearly plenty of passionate writers who like Spider-Man as well who worked on this movie. Sometimes, bad movies are successful for any number of reasons. But in the case of Spider-Man Brand New Day, it can easily be seen why. Spider-Man is the ultimate cinematic brand. You can have a script that is this bad, yet it's gonna make $1.5+ billion because Spider-Man's just that powerful. The marketing for this movie was also very well done. But at the end of the day, the box office for this movie is the truest testament for the character of Spider-Man, and no matter how hard you destroy it, it's always gonna do well. This long journey is finally over. If you made it here, consider leaving a like and subscribing, and as always, thanks for watching.